This is the first of 2 chapters I wrote for the tiny Magick concept draft when I was 16. Given that it's among the first batch of my attempts at authorship, the writing quality is shit. Just thought I'd let you know that in advance. The only reason I'm releasing this at all is as inspiration for people to mess about with the concept. If you don't know what I mean, check the first link down in the description. Now, on with the show. Chapter 1. Fairie Ex-Machina. Magick's foot found a hold in a minute crag on the mountainous mass of what presumably had once been a small decorative fountain, perhaps 10,000 years distant. Jumping over logs and rocks is easy, says anyone who isn't 13 centimeters tall. The small crevice he now had his foot in being only about 1/3 the thickness of the typical human's index fingertip. No sooner had he reached the top, a buzzer went off in his right ear, alerting him there was a call coming in on the micro-radio transceiver hooked to the back of his belt. With a flick of a switch on the microprocessing pad built into his left forearm, he accepted the call and instantly heard the distinctively irritated voice of his brother, who was, at that moment, in a very distinct state of annoyance. "Where the are you?" Magick's head twitched as what robotically passed for a smile jogged across his metallic face. Their sister, Christina, had once installed a buzzer tap in both their earpieces, which went off whenever it detected the utterance of any one of the 9 principal expletives that neither of them had since had the heart to uninstall. "I said," Tolug repeated, trading his general agitation with something more rapidly approaching actual anger. "Where the are you? Oh, off!" Magick's photo enhancement lenses flickered in and out of focus again, as without lungs his cybernetic torso was otherwise incapable of facilitating a chuckle. "Don't tell me you've gone up the stupid rock again. Chris just got your servos retuned from the last time. If you've put so much as a scratch on my radio bike, I'm going to personally tear your—" Magick disconnected the call. He knew that if Tolug was actually capable of making good on such threats, he wouldn't ever bother making them. He flexed the ball joint motors in his arms. They all seemed to be functioning normally, maybe just a little catching on the right shoulder, but that was nothing he couldn't fix himself with some generously applied lubricant when he got back to the skybox. He stared longingly out at the horizon, wondering what lay beyond that sharp divide between earth and sky, until he became aware that his inbuilt Chronos chip was chirping, alerting him that his monolayer battery pack was only 15 minutes away from switching over to backup. "Best be getting home, I suppose," he hummed in still dimly maintained delirium.
"I second that,"
said the Logistical Exploration Geographical Operation System Computer, or LEGOS for short, a name clearly dreamt up by Christina. It lit the bike's twin Archon engines, which launched the tiny vehicle the 100 centimeters from the base of the rock formation to the top before the cyborg's own electronic brain even had a chance to register its movement. It hovered there, waiting dutifully for its master, a handful of millimeters from the rock's uneven precipice, a feat not replicable by any human pilot, even one equipped with a mathematically precise bionic frame and 4 separate crystalline processor plates, each one capable of computing at a rate of 471,896,458 calculations per second. Make that
471,897,589. 472,789,987.
Magick rapped his alloy skull with hardened knuckles. He had liked machines even when he was still organic, but something about having one not just inside his head, but actually being his head, thinking for him, announcing his own thoughts back to him before he'd even had a chance to file through them the first time, was starting to get very old very quickly. He mounted the modified RC motorcycle as his system's wireless intelligence network directional system, WINS, set up to automatically establish a connection with LEGOS upon receiving such directives from the micro-interface console on the bike's center panel, gave an almost charming ping to let him know a successful connection had been established. Magick nodded once in acknowledgement. He didn't know why he always did this. He knew perfectly well the WINS was only firmware and thus could not see or hear him. Nor was there any point in trying to improve this deficit, as even if he were to wire the WINS up to a pair of photo and audio receptors and apply to it the necessary software, it still would be of only the most basic intelligence, barely above the most common insects, and would not be of much conversational use anyway. This instinct, he'd decided, was most likely one of the few remaining holdovers from his organic brain that had yet to be siphoned off. He shrugged his mechanical shoulders, another frivolous gesture he would need to purge himself of. Put that one on the to-do list, or the probably need to eventually think about doing at some point list might be more appropriate. He settled in for the long flight back, and use the intervening time to devise a strategy for avoiding Tolub. Or, if that option proved impossible, then to sideline him as much as possible until he could reach the relative safety of his nanoprint-protected lab and workstation. Speeding across the blooming, lustrous landscape of what had once been a scenic rural town, Magick's internal diagnostics chip registered an abnormal increase in activity in his crystalline brain's enveloping conductive membrane. Probably just another glitch, he told himself as he neared the hovering mechanical wonder known to those outside as the skybox, and those within simply as
home.
This remark was not uncommon for the Legos computer. It made it every time he took it on an outing without fail. But it was still a functional anomaly, and what's more, these kinds of unaccountable deviations amongst their inorganic brethren were increasing not just in their frequency of occurrence, but also in their variety and intensity. Between catching cleaning and repair drones daydreaming while they were supposed to be hard about their work, to regulation and operational forecast computers altering their original subroutines to allow for the playing of simple board games instead of deploying skybots to do things like gather data for weather predictions or making sure the core processors didn't overheat due to the massive influx of rapid computations necessary to keep the skybox's 6 antimatter reactors from atomizing everything in the surrounding 16 kilometers. These inexplicable phenomena were far too intricate and, dare he even admit it, sophisticated to be chalked up to a simple programming error or hardware malfunction. Obelisk, too, had not been spared from these prolific bouts of erratic humanity. Obelisk being the AI overseer responsible for maintaining all day-to-day functions on board the Skybox, and its only dedicated system whose name was not a horrifically contorted acronym, instead being due to the pointy shape of his mainframe, whose processor core was said to be the most advanced of its kind ever built by intelligent hands, capable of running calculations in the range of tens of trillions per second. His latest bout of what the Slinkers tasked with diagnosing the problem had referred to as severe emotional distress was far from conducive to that end. And as Magick was then the only one aware, even Legos had succumbed to the onset of these peculiarities. His derailment, however, Magick was all too willing to endure. He was happy to have someone intelligent to talk to who was at once capable of uttering a sentence without collapsing into fits of inexplicable hysteria, and who also could offer straightforward and honest opinions on matters unrelated to practical affairs, absent the impulse to be overly dismissive or contrarian, as was Tolub's tour de force.
May I ask,
chimed the computer through their shared neurological link,
why it is you undertake these sorts of escapades? You know Tolub would never approve.
Which is why I don't go out of my way to seek his approval, Magick cut in. He knew, and he knew Legos knew, that his older brother could find ways to disapprove of anything Magick, or anyone else he considered himself in charge of, did, often for no other or better reason than their actions' impetus hadn't been one of his utilitarian directives. As they sped down a canyon-like street lined with trees that were like canvas-netted mountains and dotted with houses that, had he the means to enter one, might as well have been entirely separate planets, Magick thrummed his mechanical cerebrum against the issue. A full 6 milliseconds of cogitation later, his vocalizer spat out a query of its own accord. "Where's your sense of adventure?" It was a pointless question, and the dead air that swallowed it was all the answer he could, or at least should, have expected. For all its unorthodox verbal eloquence, the computer was not sentient, at least not yet. Magick was fully aware of this fact, and he knew that Legos too was aware of this deficiency to within the limits of its operative capacity. He thereby also knew that the concept of seeking adventure was entirely the providence of post-humanity, being utterly incalculable to a thing whose mind was literally hardwired for economical procession.
Perhaps we could put your radical tendencies to some more practical use,
Legos offered after another millisecond's consideration.
If we investigated that old railway junction a few kilometers to the east, rather than wasting valuable energy running off to have a staring contest with the ozone layer.
Magick rolled his eyes. Figuratively, of course. He would never let Legos know it, but his brain, which had never been anything but an inorganic crystalline matrix, still remembered what it felt like to be truly human, as indicated by his inexpertly adapted synapses still consistently resulting in such obnoxious involuntary reflexes as offering physical gestures to a program that could no more interpret these signals than it could offer its own in response. The neural pattern his synthetic membranes had traced knew the serene wonder and rush of adrenaline which came with experiencing alien sights and sounds, sensations he now felt as mere shadows of what had once been, and what had never truly been his His organic counterpart might have likened it to trying to catch the fading memory of a lucid dream, but to dream required one to be asleep. A digital processor such as was currently tucked neatly behind what he still consciously thought of as eyes needed no such interlude. The closest analogy he could conceive was that of a piece of irretrievable, corrupted data, one which he could still make out the basic framework of, but that even his advanced heuristic software could not decode any further rhyme or reason in. Like a song half remembered. Another pattern anomaly. At least that problem he had a plausible explanation for. It was not uncommon for skippies like himself to experience sporadic flashes of their organic template's original brainwave patterns. Fragments of old memories sporadically made to surface through appropriately applied stimuli. But for them to persist for so long after first activation was highly unusual. Magick wondered what could have set him apart to make such a logical inefficiency possible. Thankfully, before he could follow that train of thought any further, Lagos interrupted his musings with a cold, pre-programmed chirp.
We've arrived.
Magick did not need to look up to know what he would see there waiting for them. Lagos uttered this same emotionless line at this precise instant every single time they went out on these little voyages. And one of Magick's most basic programs was a detailed working map of every nut, rivet, and scrap of metal within the floating fortress Magick and the 1,562 others like him had all called home for an estimated 42,857.8245 standard Earth rotations. Magick dismounted his hoverbike, which then, courtesy of Lagos's automatic docking program, gracefully parked itself in between the electromagnetic clamp's jaws and was firmly locked into place. Magick followed suit onto the half-meter-long shuttle that would transport them the roughly 16 kilometers from ground level to the skybox's only unshielded and therefore top-secret hangar bay. This was a cumbersome but necessary part of their journey, as neither Magick nor his hoverbike would have withstood the exponentially greater turbulence present at such high altitudes. The winds around the skybox regularly clocking in at around 80 to 120 kilometers an hour. It was tortuous to look upon, according to every organic being that had ever had the misfortune of doing so, like a thorn bush that had, for reasons hitherto undeciphered by botanists, tried and failed to commit seppuku. The skybox consisted of 6 black spires of various stalagmite dimensions, all arranged around and on a seemingly erratic geometric crystal hub with no discernible rhyme or reason. If a castle could catch the plague, its terminal stages would have looked positively radiant compared to the skybox on its best day. Magick spared a moment, or more precisely 35.45 microseconds, to consider the oddity of his having and rolling phantom eyeballs. The reason for this consideration being that as he watched the unblemished Earth sink despairingly away beneath him, he could just barely hear his brother's voice saying, "When you get back here, I'm going to flay you and use your tin hide for a weather vane." Magick's vocalizer emitted a raspy growl that, if he'd had organic lungs, would have been a haddle breath and long-suffering sigh.
End of Chapter 1. If you're interested in hearing the rest, leave a like and a comment to that effect. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed, and have a great day.